Luke Warren had lived most of his life under the open sky, with nothing but the sound of the wind and the soft steps of his horse to keep him company. He was a cowboy who worked honestly, kept to himself, and avoided trouble whenever he could. People in town knew him as the quiet man who always helped others without asking for anything in return. But even those who knew him well had no idea how far his kindness could reach, or how deeply he would risk himself for someone who was practically a stranger. One late afternoon, after a long day of riding across the dry land, Luke decided to check his traps before heading back home. The sun was sitting low, spreading an orange glow across the sky. His horse, Dusty, walked slowly, tired from hours of traveling. Luke gently patted Dusty's neck and whispered, the way a man speaks to an old friend, "Just a little longer, boy. Almost done." As they moved through a narrow ravine, Dusty suddenly stopped. His ears flicked forward, and he let out a nervous breath. Luke frowned. He trusted Dusty's instincts. Horses sense things long before men did. Luke slid off the saddle, loosened the reins, and looked around carefully. The ravine was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the sound of insects. Luke took a few steps forward, scanning the rocks on both sides. Something caught his eye, something that didn't belong. A small movement, a faint sound, almost like a weak groan. He slowly walked toward the rocks, keeping his hands away from his gun so he wouldn't seem like a threat. When he came close enough, he finally saw her. A young Apache woman lay on the ground, half hidden behind a large rock. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, and her face pale from exhaustion. An arrow was stuck in her leg, dried blood covering her skin. She was breathing fast, her chest rising and falling unevenly. When she heard Luke's footsteps, she opened her eyes, slowly. Fear filled them instantly. She tried to pull herself away, but her body was too weak to move. Luke froze. He didn't want to scare her. He raised both hands and stepped back a little to show her he meant no harm. In a calm voice he said, "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. You're hurt. You need help." But she didn't believe him. She pressed her hand to the ground, trying to push herself up. Pain shot through her body, and she winced. Her other hand reached for a small knife lying beside her, but she didn't have the strength to hold it properly. Luke slowly crouched down, keeping his distance. "Don't move too much," he said gently. "If you keep struggling, you'll make the wound worse." She glared at him, unsure whether he was a friend or another enemy. Her breathing grew faster, and her hands trembled. She was scared, not just because of her injuries, but because she didn't understand why a cowboy would be standing there offering help. Luke looked at the arrow in her leg. It wasn't deep enough to be fatal, but she had clearly lost too much blood. If he didn't do something soon, she might not make it through the night. He glanced back at Dusty. His horse was the only thing he depended on, the only animal he trusted. Without Dusty, traveling across miles of land would be harder, slower, and more dangerous. But Luke didn't think about himself in that moment. He thought about the woman lying in front of him, alone, scared, hurt, and probably running from something she couldn't escape on foot. "What happened to you?" Luke asked softly. She didn't answer at first. After a long moment, she whispered, her voice thin and shaky. "They came, in the night. My people, attacked." Her words were broken, but Luke understood enough. She had been fleeing for days, trying to survive with a wounded leg and almost no water. Luke took a slow breath. This wasn't his fight. But leaving her was not an option, not for a man like him. He moved a little closer, still making sure she saw every step he took. "I can take you to my cabin," he said. "I can clean your wound. You'll be safe there." She shook her head weakly. No trust. Cowboy lie. Luke felt a sting inside. He wasn't angry, just sad that she had lived a life where trusting men meant danger. He pushed his rifle far away from him and placed his knife on the ground. "See? I'm not holding anything. I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. Her eyes softened a little, though she still looked unsure. Her voice broke again as she whispered, "Can't walk." Luke sighed deeply. It was the truth. She couldn't walk, and he couldn't carry her miles through rough land. There was only one way to save her. He stood up, walked back to Dusty, and brought the horse closer. Dusty snorted softly, nervous about the situation, but loyal enough to trust Luke. Luke carefully lifted the woman. She was lighter than he expected, trembling from weakness, and placed her on Dusty's saddle. She let out a small gasp of pain, but didn't push him away this time. When she realized what he had done, she looked down at him with disbelief. Your horse?" she whispered. Luke nodded. "You need him more than I do right now." She shook her head weakly. "You walk? All the way?" "I'll manage," he answered with a small smile. "A little walking never killed anyone." She looked at him with wide eyes, unable to understand why a cowboy would give his only horse, his most important partner, to a wounded stranger from another world. Her heart tightened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Luke handed her the reins and stepped back. "Follow the trail straight ahead," he told her. "My cabin isn't far. I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, still unsure whether she should trust him, but her body was too weak to argue anymore. After a long pause, she nodded faintly, holding the saddle horn with trembling hands. As Dusty began to walk, the woman glanced back at Luke repeatedly. She seemed confused, almost worried about leaving him behind, but Luke just waved at her gently and started walking on foot through the rough land. The path was long and uneven. The sun was dropping quickly, the temperature turning cold. Luke's boots kicked up dust with every step, and his legs ached. But he kept moving, watching Dusty carrying the woman toward safety. He didn't rush her, didn't shout, didn't pressure her. He walked at a steady pace, patient and calm. Every now and then, the woman turned her head to check if he was still following, and every time she saw him, he gave her the same gentle nod. Something inside her chest warmed. She didn't know this man, yet he treated her with a kindness she had never seen. By the time they reached the small wooden cabin, the night had already taken over the sky. A soft glow from the moon lit the area. Luke looked tired, dust on his clothes, sweat on his forehead, but he walked straight to the porch and opened the door for her. He didn't say much, just helped her down gently and supported her weight so she wouldn't fall. She leaned on him, surprised at his strength, and surprised even more by the quiet safety she felt near him. He guided her inside, lit a lantern, and pointed to the single bed in the room. She hesitated, but he said softly, "It's warm. You need rest." Then he pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down. He didn't crowd her or ask questions. He simply stayed near her so she wouldn't feel alone. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the woman closed her eyes without fear. Luke watched her breathe slowly, her body finally relaxing. As the flame from the lantern flickered gently, he knew that today had changed something in him, something he didn't fully understand yet. All he knew was that helping her felt right, even if the world might not understand why. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew he couldn't leave her. And in the silent glow of that small cabin, a bond, fragile, unexpected, and powerful, began to form between a lonely cowboy and a wounded Apache woman who never expected to find kindness in a stranger. The morning sun slipped through the small cabin window, casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. Nara slowly opened her eyes, confused for a moment, unsure of where she was. Her body felt heavy, but the painful ache in her leg was still there, reminding her of everything she went through. She looked around, expecting danger, unfamiliar faces, or rough voices, but the room was quiet. The air smelled like fresh wood and a faint hint of smoke from last night's fire. Her gaze fell on Luke, sitting near the window in an old wooden chair. His hat rested on his knee, his head gently lowered as he dozed lightly. She noticed the tired lines on his face, the dust still settled on his boots, and the way he rested his large hands calmly on his lap. He must have stayed awake most of the night. She didn't know why a stranger would do such a thing for her, but she couldn't deny the warmth that crept into her chest as she watched him. Luke stirred slightly, sensing movement. When he opened his eyes, he didn't panic or jolt up. He simply offered her a gentle smile. The kind of smile that told her she was safe. "You're awake," he said softly, keeping his voice calm so she wouldn't feel alarmed. Nara didn't answer at first. She wasn't used to soft voices. In her world, loud orders and rushed cries were far more common. But she managed a small nod and whispered, "Where?" "I am?" "My cabin," Luke replied. "You made it through the night. Your fever dropped. That's a good sign." She looked puzzled. Fever? She didn't even remember half of yesterday. All she remembered was running, pain, fear, darkness, and then the strange cowboy's gentle hands lifting her onto his horse. She glanced down at her leg and saw a bandage wrapped neatly around the wound. "You did this?" she asked quietly. Luke nodded. "Had to clean it. Arrow wasn't deep, but it was dirty. You needed rest." He didn't sound proud or heroic, just honest. Nara tried to sit up, but pain shot straight through her body. She winced and gripped the blanket. Luke quickly stood up, but didn't touch her without asking. "Easy there," he said. "Don't push yourself yet." His careful distance surprised her. Most men she had met were either aggressive or too curious. Luke was neither. He helped only when needed, spoke only when necessary, and gave her space when she wanted it. Luke walked to the small stove, poured warm water into a cup, and brought it to her. "Drink. You're dehydrated." She stared at the cup. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for it. Luke noticed and held the cup steady until she got a firm grip. She took small sips, letting the warmth slide through her dry throat. After finishing the water, she watched him prepare simple food. Nothing fancy, just warm oats cooked over the fire. She felt her stomach growl, embarrassed by the sound. Luke pretended he didn't hear it. He simply placed the bowl on a small table beside her and stepped back so she could eat in peace. Nara looked at the food cautiously. She wasn't used to strangers feeding her, but hunger won, and she took slow bites. The taste was simple but comforting. Every spoonful warmed her from the inside. Luke sat back in his chair, quietly carving a small piece of wood with a knife. Before she arrived, he had been carving a leaf, shaping it carefully with practiced hands. His movements were calm and steady. He didn't stare at her, didn't ask her to talk. He just let the silence sit comfortably between them. After a while, Nara whispered, "Why help me? You risk trouble." Luke paused, looked at her, and shrugged slightly. "Didn't seem right to leave you out there. No one deserves to suffer like that." Nara lowered her eyes. She wasn't used to kindness. She didn't know what to say. After a moment, she spoke softly. "My name is Nara." Luke nodded. They exchanged simple glances, just enough to acknowledge each other, not enough to overwhelm. Nara finished her food and rested her head against the pillow again. Luke took the bowl away and checked her bandage carefully. He always explained what he was doing before touching her, giving her time to prepare. "You're healing," he said. "Wounds clean. No sign of infection." Nara didn't understand how someone could be so gentle. She watched him work, noticing the small details of his movements. He was rough on the outside, strong hands, sunburned skin, calloused fingers but soft on the inside. It confused her, but it also eased her heart. Luke didn't ask about her past, but she felt his unspoken curiosity. He waited quietly until she was ready to speak on her own terms. After some silence, Nara finally said, "My people, we were forced away. We moved to new land. But other band attacked us. I think, maybe only I survived." Her voice cracked on the last word. She turned her face away, trying to hide the tears that were forming. Luke didn't move closer. He just let her speak, letting her carry the weight in her own time. "I ran," she whispered. "I hid. 2 days. No water. No food. Thought I'd die there." Luke's jaw tightened slightly, not out of anger at her but at the cruelty she had suffered. Nara wiped her eyes, surprised by how much those simple words eased her. She looked at him again. "Why you live alone?" she asked softly. Luke took a slow breath. "Lost my family years ago. Fever took them. I stayed behind." His voice remained calm, but she saw a shadow cross his eyes. "After that, I just didn't fit in with town folks anymore. So, I came out here." Nara understood loss better than most. She felt a deep connection in that moment, two people from different worlds, both carrying old wounds in their hearts. As days passed, Nara slowly regained strength. Luke made sure she had everything she needed. He fetched water, chopped wood, fed the animals, and cooked meals while she watched from the bed. Sometimes, she tried to help, but the pain in her leg forced her to rest. Luke always told her not to rush healing. During the evenings, she watched him work. He would fix broken tools, mend torn saddle straps, or carve small wooden shapes. At first, he carved simple leaves. But one night, she noticed he was carving something different, a small bird. She didn't know why he chose that shape, but she liked watching it come to life in his hands. Nara slowly felt the fear inside her soften. The cabin was small, but it felt safe. The nights were quiet, filled only with the crackling of the fire. Sometimes Luke hummed a soft tune while he worked, and it soothed her more than she expected. One evening, as Luke stirred a pot of soup, Nara mustered the courage to ask what she had been thinking about from the moment she arrived. "Why you give me your horse?" she whispered. Luke paused, then turned to her with a gentle expression. "Because leaving you there wasn't an option," he said. "Dusty's strong. He could carry you, and I could walk. Simple as that." Nara stared at him with disbelief. "Horse is important. You need it for life. Work. Travel. Travel." "I know," Luke said with a soft laugh. "That's why I gave him to you." She didn't understand. "Why? You don't know me." "You were hurt," Luke replied simply. "That's enough." Nara felt something shift inside her chest again, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. Trust. A quiet warmth she couldn't describe with words. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand the kind of man he was. Luke didn't look away, but he didn't stare, either. He held a gentle, humble presence, like someone who didn't need recognition or reward. Helping her had simply been the right thing to do. As the days blended together, an unspoken bond grew between them. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was soft, natural, and steady, built with small gestures, gentle words, and mutual respect. Luke never pressured her to talk, never crossed her boundaries. He made sure she felt in control of her own space. Nara began to smile a little more, speak a little more, and trust him a little more. She learned that he liked early mornings, black coffee, and fixing anything he could get his hands on. Luke learned that she liked watching the sunrise, listening to the birds, and sitting quietly without noise or questions. For two people who had lost so much, the simple comfort of shared silence brought healing neither expected. But peace never lasted long in their world. Outside that cabin, Danger still waited, danger Luke had sensed, but hadn't fully understood yet. And soon, both of them would realize that saving Nara's life was only the beginning of everything that was about to come. Days passed quietly, and Nara's strength slowly returned. Luke saw her walk a few steps farther every morning, her balance improving, her face no longer pale with exhaustion. He felt relief each time he saw color return to her cheeks. She was healing, and that alone made everything he had done worth it. But even as the days grew peaceful inside the cabin, Luke sensed something troubling outside of it. Tracks appeared near his property, fresh ones. He noticed them one early morning when he stepped out to fetch water from the well. The footprints were too deep, too many, and too close. Someone had been walking around the cabin while they slept. At first, Luke didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the tension in his chest wouldn't fade. He trusted his instincts, and something inside told him danger was coming. He tried not to let Nara see his worry, but she was sharper than he realized. She watched him from the doorway as he studied the tracks, her brows furrowing slightly. "You found something?" she asked softly. Luke looked up, hesitating for a moment before answering. Nara stepped outside, leaning lightly against the doorframe to ease pressure on her recovering leg. She looked at the ground, and her eyes sharpened instantly. "Not settlers," she whispered. "Not your people." Luke nodded. "I figured." She knelt carefully beside the prints, tracing one with her fingertips. "These men, they followed me. They attacked my tribe. They search for survivors." Her voice grew faint. "If they find me here, you get hurt." Luke walked to her side and gently helped her stand. "I can handle trouble," he said calmly. "But I'm not letting them take you." Nara's eyes softened with fear, not for herself this time, but for him. She knew those men were ruthless. They weren't trackers hunting for food, or soldiers following orders. They were destroyers. And if they found Luke protecting her, they would see him as an obstacle. She went back inside the cabin and sat quietly near the fire, her hands clasped tightly together. Luke watched her in silence, noticing the tension in her shoulders. He wished he could ease her worry. But the world outside that cabin didn't care about peace. Later that night, Luke sharpened his tools and made sure his rifle was clean. He wasn't preparing for a fight, he was preparing to protect his home, his land, and Nara. The cabin was small, built with his own hands over years. But now it held someone else too. Someone he felt strangely responsible for. Someone who trusted him despite everything. Nara noticed his quiet preparation. She approached him slowly and sat down beside him. "You do not have to fight for me," she whispered. "I do not want harm come to you." Luke shook his head. "That's not your choice. You're under my roof. I won't let anyone hurt you." She stared at him with deep emotion. "You do more than any man ever do for me," she said. "Why?" Luke didn't know how to explain it. Maybe because she came into his life when he least expected it. Maybe because he saw fear in her eyes and couldn't walk away. Or maybe it was something deeper, something neither of them could name yet. But he simply said, "Because someone had to." The next morning, Luke found smoke rising in the far distance, not from his cabin, but from the hills beyond. It was the kind of smoke that warned him riders were traveling. He returned to the cabin and quietly locked the door. Nara sensed the change before he even spoke. "They are coming," she whispered. Luke nodded slowly. "Looks like it." He placed extra wood on the fire, checked the windows, and told Nara to stay close. She didn't argue. Instead, she asked him a question that startled him. "If they come, you run? Leave me. They want me, not you." Luke turned sharply toward her. "I don't leave people behind. Not ever." She looked down at her hands, troubled by the idea that she might be the reason he faced danger. She had lived too long under the belief that her presence brought trouble. But Luke didn't see her that way. To him, She wasn't a burden, she was a person who needed protection, and he was willing to give it. Before noon, Luke heard the distant sound of hooves. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, and scanned the horizon. The riders appeared slowly at first, dark shapes against the bright land. 5 men, all armed, all watching the cabin with unfriendly eyes. Nara stood behind him inside the cabin, peeking through the slightly open door. Her heartbeat quickened. She recognized 2 of them. They were part of the group that had ambushed her tribe. They were the ones who chased her. Luke took a step forward but remained calm. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't want to start anything. But he also wasn't going to back away. The men approached, stopping a few yards from the cabin. Their leader, a man with a rough beard and cold eyes, called out, "We're looking for someone." Luke's voice remained steady. "Who?" "A woman from the Apache band," the leader replied. "Heard she's wounded." Luke kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen anyone." The leader stared at him for a long, silent moment. "Funny," he said. "Tracks say otherwise." Inside the cabin, Nara's chest tightened. She feared they would search the place. She feared Luke would get hurt because of her. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself and whispered a small prayer under her breath. The men began to spread out, their horses stepping lightly across the dry ground. Luke stood firm. "This is private land," he warned. "You're not welcome here." The leader raised an eyebrow. "We're not here to talk about land. We're here for the woman." Luke took one deep breath. "You're not taking anyone from this cabin." At that exact moment, Nara stepped outside. She knew hiding wouldn't work. She knew Luke would fight for her, even if it cost him his life. She couldn't let that happen. When she walked out, the men froze. Shock washed over their faces. One hissed under his breath, "She's alive?" Nara stood beside Luke, though her legs shook. She looked smaller than the armed men, but her voice held surprising strength when she spoke. "You leave. Now." The leader scoffed. "You think you can order us?" Nara lifted her chin. "I am daughter of chief. You attack my people. That crime will not go unpunished. If you hurt this man or step closer, my tribe will rise against you." The men exchanged looks. They didn't expect her to speak with such authority. One whispered, "If she returns to her tribe alive, they'll come after us." The leader hesitated, realizing the risk. Fighting a lone cowboy was one thing. Fighting an entire Apache tribe was another. He pulled on his reins and glared at Luke. "You're making a mistake, cowboy." Luke didn't blink. "Maybe, but not today." The men slowly backed their horses away. They didn't ride off quickly, they wanted to show they weren't afraid, but they retreated nonetheless. After they disappeared over the hill, Luke let out a long breath he had been holding. Nara turned to look at him, her eyes deep with gratitude and emotion. She took a step closer and whispered, "You saved me again." Luke shook his head. "You saved yourself. You scared them off with your words." She smiled softly, but then her expression turned serious. She knew she had to show him something beyond simple thanks, something that came from her heart. She looked up into his eyes and said quietly, "I offer you something no one else can give." Luke frowned slightly, not understanding. Nara placed her hand over her heart. "I offer you my loyalty, my protection, my promise that you will never stand alone again." Her voice trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from sincerity. Luke didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to receiving anything, especially not something as deep and meaningful as a promise from someone he barely knew. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized something had changed between them. They were no longer just a cowboy and a wounded woman. They were 2 people tied together by danger, trust, and a bond that neither of them expected to grow so strong. And this bond was only going to grow stronger in the days to come. The days that followed the standoff were quiet, but they carried a new weight. Luke kept watch around the cabin every morning and evening, scanning the land for signs of danger. He knew the riders who came looking for Nara might return, but he also knew they wouldn't forget the warning she had given them. Still, he didn't take chances. He made sure the horses stayed close, tools stayed sharp, and the cabin remained secure. Inside, something else was changing. Nara no longer seemed like a guest or a wounded stranger. She moved through the cabin with more confidence, more warmth. She helped grind herbs, cleaned the table, and even laughed softly when Luke tried to teach her a clumsy tune on his harmonica. She spoke more, smiled more, and sometimes sat close enough that he could feel the comfort of her presence. Luke liked having her there more than he expected. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night just to check if she was resting peacefully. He cooked more carefully so she would enjoy the meals. He left the cabin windows open during sunset because she said she loved the soft orange light. His quiet life didn't feel so empty anymore. She filled the silence with meaning. One evening, as they ate a simple dinner of beans and warm bread, Nara looked at him in a thoughtful way. "My leg heal," she said. "I can walk good now. Soon, I return to my people." Luke pretended to focus on his food, but his heart tightened. He knew this moment would come. He knew she had a life outside his cabin, a tribe, memories, responsibilities. But the idea of her leaving made the small cabin suddenly feel cold and empty again. "That's good," Luke replied gently. "Your family will be glad to have you back." Nara watched him carefully. She could sense the change in his voice. It wasn't sadness, exactly more like a quiet acceptance, mixed with something he tried to hide. She knew he cared for her. She knew he was trying not to show it. She put down her bowl and took a slow breath. "You come with me," she said softly. Luke blinked, surprised. "To your tribe?" She nodded. "Yes. They must know who saved me. They must meet the man who gave his only horse. The man who protected me." Luke wasn't sure. "Nara, your people might not want me there. Settlers and tribes don't always trust each other. My people trust me," she said simply, "and I trust you." Those last words hit his heart with a quiet force. Nara smiled, a warm, grateful smile he would remember for years. The next morning, they packed supplies. Luke saddled Dusty and secured bags with water, herbs, and food. Nara tightened her belt and tied her hair back, looking stronger than ever. When they were ready to leave, she placed a hand on the cabin door and looked around the small room. "This place keep me alive," she whispered. "I not forget." Luke shut the door behind them, and together they rode out into the open land. Dusty carried both of them easily, moving with steady steps. The ride was quiet at first, but peaceful. Birds flew overhead, and the wind brushed across the grass. Luke felt Nara lean slightly against him for balance, and the closeness warmed him. After a few miles, Nara pointed to the horizon. "My people camp near river, behind those hills." As they approached, Luke felt the tension rise. He didn't know how they would react. Would they see him as a threat? An intruder? Or would they listen to Nara's words? When they reached the camp, several Apache men spotted them and raised their bows cautiously. Luke stopped Dusty immediately, keeping his hands visible. He didn't want to cause panic. Nara lifted her chin and called out loudly, "It is me. Nara, I return." The men gasped in disbelief. A few ran forward, calling for their leader. Within moments, elders, women, and children gathered around, shocked to see her alive. One older woman, Nara's aunt, rushed to her side with tears streaming down her face. They helped Nara down gently as Luke stepped back, giving them space. He kept Dusty still, staying quiet and respectful. The people hugged Nara, touching her face, her hands, her hair, making sure she was real. She let them hold her for a moment before raising her hand to quiet them. "I live because of him," she said, pointing toward Luke. "He saved me. Without him, I die in desert." All eyes turned to Luke. Some looked wary, some curious, but none looked threatening. Nara continued. He took me to his home. He healed me. He protect me when enemies come. He risk everything. The tribe murmured in surprise. The leader, a tall, strong man with calm eyes, approached Luke slowly. He studied him for a long moment before nodding in respect. You show great courage, he said. You help one of ours when others would turn away. Luke shook his head. It was the right thing to do. The leader smiled gently. Right things are hardest to find in this world. They welcomed Luke into the camp not as an enemy, but as an honored guest. Children followed him curiously, touching his boots and hat, giggling when he dropped his hat for them to play with. Women offered him food, and men shook his hand, thanking him quietly. Nara watched all of this with soft eyes. She stood beside him as the people prepared a small celebration. There was music, dancing, and laughter, things Luke hadn't heard in years. He found himself smiling without thinking, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt since before his family passed. Later that night, as the fire crackled and the stars filled the sky, Nara walked toward him with slow steps. She sat beside him on the soft grass, her shoulder brushing his gently. My people accept you, she said. Luke glanced at her and smiled softly. I'm glad. She turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I want you to stay, she said quietly. Not for one day. Not for short time. I want you to stay with me. Luke's breath caught for a moment. He hadn't expected her to say it so clearly, so honestly. Nara. She placed her hand over his. You gave me life. You gave me safety. You gave me trust. I want to give you something too. He looked at her hand, small and warm against his rough skin, and felt a connection deeper than anything he had known in years. She continued softly. I give you place in my heart, and place in my people. You not be alone again. Luke swallowed hard, emotion rising in him. Are you sure? He asked. I don't want to bring trouble to your tribe. Quote, you bring peace, she answered. And hope. That is what we need. Luke looked into her eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity. Nara's face lit up with a smile so genuine and warm that Luke felt his chest grow lighter. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and he placed his hand over hers. Around them, the fire danced, the tribe laughed, and the stars watched quietly overhead. For Luke, life had changed completely. He had arrived at this camp as a cowboy, with no family, no purpose, and no place in the world. But he found all three in Nara. And for Nara, the man who gave her his only horse, who protected her without hesitation, had become more than a savior. He had become the person she wanted beside her for the rest of her days. Together, they built a new life, one shaped by courage, trust, and hearts that found each other against all odds.